Yeah, give it to me. Oh, thanks. Hi, my name is Brennan O'Leary, and I have a theory. I think that everything I've ever needed to know about DevOps, I could have learned from XKCD. And in fact, it's still teaching me today. For those who may not know the comic, I'll let XKCD define itself for you. Honestly, can anyone think of a better definition of DevOps than a methodology of romance, sarcasm, math, and language? It's a good thing the comic is Creative Commons licensed. I've been doing some form of DevOps for years, and I've been going to DevOps days for many of them. So I hope to bring you a new perspective today. Let's first remember, though, that DevOps is over 10 years old. The first DevOps days was in 2009, and I double-checked. That is more than 10 years ago. And this comic here is actually already 2 years old itself. Yet, sometimes it can still feel like a rickroll when you go to a talk or a meeting about DevOps and really learn nothing. This talk is, of course, excluded from that. And while it's tempting to make up stories about having to enter release notes into a teletype or my first SSH key being encrypted in Morse code, it's critical for us to actually remember and recount the before times. It wasn't that long ago that I was brought into a government contractor where the deployment methodology for a critical system was actually an 11-page Word document that told you which jar files to copy where, and in what order, because somehow that mattered. There are plenty of folks that are still living with inefficient processes. And worst, some of those folks' bosses think that DevOps is something you buy off a shelf. It's our job to help educate those who will carry on DevOps after we're gone so that we can all learn from the past. So, okay, what can XKCD teach us about DevOps how-do? Well, first and most importantly, I think, is outside-the-box thinking. If we're the ones carrying the DevOps flag in our organization, we need to own this. Now, my marketing department, the event organizers, and my mother probably want me to make it clear that I'm not recommending you code inebriated. But I would challenge you to question the status quo, question everything, and think different. That's an Apple and a Microsoft reference in one slide. It's vital to know that everyone is faking it until they make it. Think of conference call talks as the Instagram of DevOps. Remember when you're looking at them, you're seeing the best possible version of that person or company. And here's the thing. I myself reference these comics about Git all the time, and I work at a company with Git in the name. It's okay to not know everything. Everyone has processes that aren't perfect. Even once we think we have a process down, there may be another problem up or down the stack. In that way, our jobs are never really done. You never really have DevOps or complete a DevOps transformation, with apologies to consultants who build that way. And no matter how well you plan, your systems will fail you at some point. And it may not even be your fault, but it will be your responsibility. So planning for things like left pad being removed from the NPM registry or the doomsday scenario suggested here just makes sense. Test for and plan losing basically every part of the stack that you're responsible for and much that you're not. We have to also recognize that DevOps isn't really the thing that DevOps is trying to optimize for. It's the developer productivity. An example here comes from years ago. I was at a small medical software company and walking from the CEO's office back to mine. In between this was the server room, and the door was open, which is never a good sign. Inside, one of our lead engineers had a server with a screwdriver in it. That server was the Redmine server. They were fixing it because they didn't know what to work on next. And it was at that moment that I had a moment of clarity. I don't want my team, our engineers, spending time on the tools that we use. I want them spending time on differentiated work that benefits our customers. That's the hard work we all want to focus on. And the first 10 years or so of DevOps saw an explosion of new tools and the latest cool thing for people to put screwdrivers in, either literally or in the AWS console. The next 10 looks very different, and we've already seen that. Just as our phones do a lot more than they did in 2008 or 9, DevOps tools are seeing massive consolidation. Organizations that required lots of these tools have spent enormous amounts of undifferentiated work stitching those tools together, managing the integrations between them, maintaining and upgrading them. All of this has led organizations to think of their tool set as not a set of random tools, but as a DevOps platform. DevOps tools, companies, and software is consolidating in much the same way. So where does that leave us? Well, if I could leave you with one thing, it would be that there's always more to learn, and that's okay. I've learned a lot, even putting together this silly presentation with cartoons. Did you know there's a web-based terminal-inspired interface for XKCD? I know, right? It's very meta, but also very awesome. And unfortunately, this talk isn't even that original. Randall, the creator of XKCD, has done one or two himself. And lastly, you can learn about learning. It's important to understand that we're all learning. That's what makes us human. Just because someone doesn't know something that you do doesn't mean you should shame them for that. You should feel lucky that you get to teach them about it. I think that's pretty obvious for most of us, but it's even more critical to remember this when you're on the other side of the equation. We are all learning. Thank you so much for having me.